In the last section, we were able to set up some number of relations between a user, a blog post, and a comment. We saved all three models. Then we fetched our user out of the user collection. When we then console logged it, we saw it inside the terminal, but it didn't quite look exactly like what we wanted. We want to have our blog posts inside of here actually kind of load up inside this thing, right? We want to actually get a reference or get a handle on the actual blog post object so we know what the title or content or whatever else exists for each of these blog posts that we have. But unfortunately, we have just the ID. So to solve this issue, we're going to jump a little bit into the idea of queries inside of Mongo. We haven't quite touched queries just yet, but we will explore them a little bit inside this section and talk about how they're relevant to this kind of process of loading up data. So first, we need to understand what a query is. So this is a breakdown of the current statement that we have inside of our test file. We have user find one dot then inside there, right? That's what we have right now. So if we break this statement down piece by piece, we can turn it into just user find one and then. User in this case says look inside of my user collection. Find one is the type of query, where a query is an operation to look through all the records in our database. So we're specifically saying find the first record with this criteria. And then the real magic, the really important part here that we haven't quite seen in practice just yet is what .then is actually doing. If we just type into our code base right now, user.findOne, and just leave it at that, like nothing else, nothing will actually be issued off to our database. When we just say find one, when we just call find one, that returns what is called a query. A query does not actually go off to our database automatically. It's only when we say .then that the query actually gets executed. You'll also see a lot of existing documentation around Mongoose use a slightly different keyword for executing the query. You'll frequently see the word exec, short for execute. Exec is for use with the older legacy callback type syntax, but we are using promises throughout this entire course. And when you're using promises to start up the query, you use the .then. So you will see exec in some places. It is equivalent to .then, but .then is the more modern syntax. So anyways, again, three big parts right now for all the queries we've seen: the collection we're operating on, the type of operation, and then the actual execution of that operation. So our big problem that we have right now is that our query isn't quite finding all the data that we want it to find. Inside of Mongoose, we have the operation or the ability to add on some number of modifiers to our query. Modifier right here, by the way, it's italics. I know it's kind of light, but it's in italics because there's nothing actually called modifiers. I just mean to say that we can add in some functions right here that are modifiers. Modifiers work to enhance the query or make it more specific, or sometimes more broad or more generic, and tell the query to load up more data. Modifiers are used to customize the query that we're making. In our case, we are not currently loading up the blog post association. There is a modifier that we can use called the populate modifier to make sure that whenever we make this query, the query will also load up our collection or our associated blog posts that are associated with the user that gets fetched here. So let's see what that looks like in practice. So this is what it looks like. We still have the reference to the collection, the operation that we want to make, and then a modifier to the query. And then finally at the end, we still have the executor, or in our case, the .then statement. Populate works by passing it a list of strings. And let me be really specific. When I say list of strings, I mean not an array of strings, but we can pass in like as an argument 1, argument 2, argument 3, a couple of different strings, where each string represents a relation that we want to load up on the model that gets returned from the find one operation. So in total, we can read this entire statement as go into the user collection, find a user with the name of Joe, load up any associated blog post that Joe has, and then call the function that we passed to then. Or maybe a better last step there would be then execute the query. So this is what we're going to do to enhance our query that we have right now and make sure that our blog posts are actually getting loaded up. So I'm going to flip back over to my code editor. And after we do our find one operation, I'm going to insert another step in here to modify the query that we're making. I'm going to say populate, and I want to specifically populate my blog post association. Just to be 100% clear, I'm able to say blog post right here specifically because in my user model, I have the property blog post written out right here. This is really important to note because if we go back over to, say, our comment file, so here's my comment file, you'll recall that I had said that there's definitely some thought to go into whenever you are relating a user here. We said user, we could have just as easily said author or something like that, the author of this comment. If you start using some fancy terminology for all your different properties, you will need to make sure that when you call your populate statement, you add in the correct reference to the right property. So right now, if we were putting out a query for comments and we wanted to load up the associated user, we would say user. If we had gone with author over here, so if we had said author, we did not say author, but if we had, we would instead in the populate statement say author like so. So just to make sure that's really clear. Okay, so we are forming up the query. We then add on a modifier, and then we execute the query. So now when we see a console log, I will expect to see the blog post loaded up in total. So let's flip over, and hot dog. All right, so here's our user. We got the ID, we got the name. We have an array of blog posts, and inside there, we've got our automatically loaded up ID, title, and content. Fantastic, exactly what we want. So this is exactly how we deal with associations in Mongoose. But, I love doing that. I'm going to say but. One little thing. You might notice that although we have our blog post, the comment did not get loaded up at the same time. Interesting. Well, it definitely seems like if we're going to go through all the trouble of loading up our blog posts, whenever we get a list of our blog posts, we probably want to see all the comments associated with them as well, right? Yeah, that definitely makes sense. But it appears that this is an array of object. And without going too far into it, I can tell you that this is not the actual comment object. This is still just an ID right here. We could let's modify our console log just to make sure that's the case. So in my console log, I'm going to say blog posts at 0. Let's save. Okay, so there we go. So this is just the blog post by itself, and now we can very clearly see that comments is an array, and it has just the ID of the saved comment here. So now we're back in the same situation as we were before, where we had just the populate in here, or excuse me, when we did not have the populate, my mistake. So your question that might immediately come up might be, well, is there any way that we can just like recursively load up all these different associations? And the answer to that is no, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Mongoose does not make available to us the ability to recursively crawl through all these records and load up all the associations automatically. We can explicitly load up the associations. We can say explicitly, okay, load up the user with their blog posts, and then look at all the blog posts and load up their comments, but we cannot automatically say, load up the user and everything, every last record automatically associated with it. The reason for that is that if we have a highly interconnected database or a highly interconnected schema, we could have queries that for some reason, by just kind of errantly saying, oh yeah, recursively load up all my relations, those queries could take minutes, hours, days. They could easily crash. Incredibly easy to walk into that situation. So Mongoose will not let you automatically walk through an association and just recursively load up all the different associated records. Okay. I know this has been a long section, but I do want to do just one last thing because we're so close. Let's finish up our spec by adding in an assert statement. I think that we forgot to require assert at the top. So before we put in the actual assert, we'll say const assert. Too many S's there. I'm not even going to repeat that word. So we'll require an assert. And then down here, let's just assert that the user did in fact load up the blog post. We can do so by referencing the blog post, looking at the title, and making sure that the title is equal to JS is great up here. So we'll say user.blogposts at 0 dot title, totally blanking out there. And then the title was JS is great. And do make sure that, let's double check to make sure we got the capitalization correct on there and the punctuation. Yep, okay, looks like we're correct. So I'll save this. Let's check it out. Okay, test is passing. We'll see it fail really quick. I'll make a change, I'll save. Yep, test is failing. Let's go back to JS is great. And we're back to passing again. Okay, so our test is definitely working here. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take off that it.only statement. So we're going to go back to just it by itself, and we'll be able to verify that all of our tests are successfully running again. So I'm back to 21 passing tests. Okay, so this definitely works. We're definitely loading up the associated blog post. Let's continue the next section and figure out how we can possibly load up the user blog post and associated comments all at the same time.